I'm Rebecca, and in this video I'm going to be teaching you 3 different ways to shade your drawing: smudging, stippling, and crosshatching. I'll also be going over how to draw more realistically and how to break a still life drawing down into basic shapes. Let's go ahead and look at some of our materials and get started. So before we get started with our still life drawing, here are some of the supplies that you might want to try out. So first you'll need some white paper, and copier paper is just fine. You'll also want some dark paper, and if you happen to have black construction paper, that's awesome. Otherwise, any other color will be fine. For using the black paper, you'll want a white colored pencil or white charcoal, pencil sharpener, and eraser. And then on to the white paper, you'll need a pencil, a pen, a Sharpie, and some charcoal. You'll also be using the eraser and pencil sharpener for this. If you don't happen to have any of these supplies, it's totally okay. You can still do all the same techniques. So to begin with shading, you're going to want to start with a pencil, and it can be any pencil. I happen to have an artist pencil, which is HB, but you can use any number 2 pencil just fine for this. And you also might want a pencil sharpener. So when we talk about shading, we're basically talking about value. And value just means showing all the shades from dark to light. This is very easy to accomplish with your pencil simply by pushing it down really hard and basically scribbling really close together until you have a shade that appears to be almost black. Then you'll gradually lift your pencil up off the paper so you're not putting too much pressure on it, and you'll continue to do this until you're barely using any pressure to draw on the paper. So then you can see that you've now created a transition from very dark to very light. This is how we will end up creating a realistic drawing. So as I said, shading is adding value to an object. So I'm going to show you 3 really easy ways that you can shade. The first is smudging. And for smudging, you'll basically be creating a value scale with your pencil. And then simply smudging it with your finger. This is usually the traditional way to add shading or add value when you're drawing a still life. Another way to add shading is called stippling. This is basically adding a bunch of little dots close together to create a darker shade, and then spacing them further apart to show a lighter shade. So as you try to show a very light shade, your dots will appear further and further apart. And the last type of shading I'm going to show you is called crosshatching. Crosshatching means that you'll be doing a bunch of vertical lines, gradually spacing them apart as you're showing lighter shades, and then you cross over them with horizontal lines, keeping those closer together to show darker shades and further apart to show lighter shades. Now let's see what that looks like on a 3-dimensional object. So a still life is basically just a drawing of real life objects that you do in order to help you draw more realistically. You can draw things from around the house, set things up in front of you, take pictures of different scenes from your house or outside, or you can even print out a picture of a still life like I did here. So in order to get a really accurate still life, what you want to do first is you want to break all of these objects down into simple shapes and only draw the shapes on your paper. So when you're drawing a still life, you really want to make your pencil lines very light and kind of sketchy, because again, this is just the beginning of the still life. It's not the final drawing. So you can see that I've got my circle, And now this part of the pear is a little bit higher up, so I'm going to add another circle more towards the top of my first one. Then, like I said, I've got a rectangle for my pitcher. A triangle for this part right here. And then a bunch of little circles for the grapes. So now that I have my initial shapes drawn, now I can really try to make these shapes look more like the objects in this picture. So when I look at my two circles that I drew for the pear, obviously they're going to be nicely connected on the actual pear. So I'll draw a nice curved line connecting them. The pear also has the stem coming out from it, so I'll just loosely sketch the end of that stem, and then this one is okay. Now with my grapes, I don't think I really need to change too much about those right now because they already are the same shape as what you see in the picture. For my pail, or the pitcher, you can see that this actually curves out a little bit further. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to draw a darker line over my initial drawing to make it look like the base is actually bigger than the top. It also has more of a curved bottom. I can also begin to outline the handle of my pitcher a little bit more. And then really make the top of it a little bit more curved like you see up here. Now that I've got everything basically drawn in, I can go ahead and start adding my shading. Before you begin shading, it's also important to go in and erase any excess lines you might have on your drawing, just to clean it up a little bit. All right, now remember we want to create a value scale as we're cross-hatching. So when I look at my shadows, I'm going to keep my lines really nice and close together and even on top of each other, and then space them further apart for the highlights. But here's a close-up of what my grapes look like with the cross-hatching. So now I'm going to be doing some stippling for some of the grapes up here. It's really important when you're doing a still life and when you're practicing shading that you really find the technique that you like to use and the material that you think works best with that. So again, for the stippling, we do nice little dots close together for our shadows and then space them further apart for our highlights. Last, I'll be adding shading with my pencil along the pear. This will just be our regular type of smudging. So remember, you really want to make sure that your shading matches the curvature of your object. So if the pear is round, that means that you'll be shading in a round motion. You don't want to shade straight up and down because that doesn't match the curve of the pear. So try to create a really nice value scale from dark to light. Now that I've got my shading done, I can go ahead and smudge with my finger to make that shading look a little bit more natural. Now this pear isn't done, so I'll go back and I'll add some more shadows right over the top of the areas that I just did. And keep adding more shadows and smudging until you think that your object looks realistic, or until you're happy with your drawing. So here's my drawing showing the 3 different types of shading compared to the still life. So it's important to practice all 3 types, that way you know which ones that you like. Now, since we've done the shadows, we're going to practice only drawing the highlights. So now that I've shown you how to create a still life using just the shadows, now we're going to do the still life, but we're going to focus only on the highlights. So when you do something like this, you want black or some dark colored piece of paper. So any kind of construction paper would work just fine. And then you'll want a white colored pencil, white charcoal, or other white drawing utensil in order to practice drawing the highlights. So now that we know when we draw a still life, we need to break the objects down into basic shapes, I'm going to do that exact same thing that I did with the shadows, but on the highlights. Now when you're doing highlights, you want to do the same thing where you create a value scale. So for that, I will press the white pencil down nice and hard, and then just as with the regular pencil, I gradually release the pressure that I'm putting on the paper until I'm barely pressing down at all, and it gives me a scale now from light to dark. So for this drawing, I'm going to be focusing specifically on drawing the highlights of this. So there's my value scale up there. So before I start adding my highlights, again, what you want to do is very lightly adjust your shapes so they actually look like the objects you're going to be drawing. Okay, now I can start to add those highlights. So if we look at our drawing of the pear has most of its highlights up towards the top, a little bit around the stem, and then just a little bit towards the bottom. So that's where I'll be adding it on my drawing. So now if I look at my picture, even though the picture itself is actually white, the lightest areas are going to be on the right side and then also around the rim. So that's where I'm going to concentrate the white with my charcoal pencil. And the reason I'm showing you how to draw the highlights is because when you are trying to draw really realistically, you have to think about not just your shadows, but your highlights as well. And if you can think about all of those things and really try to do a range from really dark to really light or really light to really dark, then you will end up with a more realistic drawing. So here are my two finished drawings. This one showing you the different types of shading, smudging, cross-hatching, and pointillism to shade in just the shadows. And then this one showing the regular smudging and shading just the highlights. You can now use both of these in order to help you create a more realistic drawing. Alright everyone, I hope you enjoyed this video and found these techniques helpful, so now you can go out and create your own still life drawing with whatever technique and material you like best. See you next time!